the superintendent of the Sausalito Marin City School District, and also a First Five Commissioner. Dr. Garcia, good morning.
Thanks for having me, Michelle. And so it's an honor to be on the panel. And I want to appreciate everyone who's presented and the objectivity with which they have approached this topic. I just want to name that for me, as a mixed race kid that grew up here in Marin in the early 80s and 90s, that it's emotional to see and hear these things, that it's hard not to be, for people not to be angry when we hear these kinds of data. And so that's the lens with which I'm going to approach these comments. I'm not sure that I'm the right person to even hold this space, but I've been asked to participate in this panel, and it's an honor, and I'm happy to do that. The more things change, the more they stay the same in some senses, and that's what's hurtful. It's great to see that we're making some progress, and really I have like a ton of questions, as do I see many people in the chat have a ton of questions about the data, or what policy we're going to implement or what action we're going to take can be. But for those of us that have lived in this county for a long time as BIPOC people, these things are not surprising. We've experienced this for many years, whether it is in education, or it is in healthcare, or it is in housing. And I think it's important for us to really name and recognize that. And so for anyone that is feeling that emotion and looking at this data, I want to invite us to really figure out how to channel that energy into action. And I think as I read different comments in the chat, that's what's being called for here. And, and so, I was going to reach out anyway, but I would like to work with Layla and Chauncey and see how we can work with them directly here to support the work that we're doing in Marin City and in Sausalito. And as many of you are well aware, we received the first desegregation order in the state of California in 50 years. And the reason that we received that desegregation order is that many of the data points and things that have been discussed here today are really at the heart of why our school district was asked to desegregate. And so I'm going to focus a little bit on my experience as a kid growing up in Marin, and then I'm going to focus a lot on what kind of actions we're trying to take. And I think that we're having success in some areas, and we need a lot of improvement in others. But growing up in this county, I was one of two children of color that attended Old Mill School in the 80s. And it was very routine for kids who, I played soccer with and, spent the night at their houses, for us to be othered on a pretty regular basis. And, it was the 80s. Kids were mean. Kids didn't pull punches in the 80s. People just said whatever and kept it moving. And, Marin was an openly racist place in the 80s. I didn't need to go down south to hear, very creative racial slurs for Black people, or for people like myself who have, Latino backgrounds, or for Asian people. It was a pretty main feature of living in this county. And that experience really galvanized me. As a mixed race kid growing up without a dad, it was, it was hard to find my place here. It was hard to figure out how to love myself and to not internalize all of the implicit messages that people of color get in Marin by not having the same housing opportunity or not having the same opportunity and access to healthcare. And in some senses, I had a lot of privilege in that regard, being a mixed race kid, because while I was on food stamps and wore second-hand clothes for the first couple years that we lived in Marin, because my grandfather, my white grandfather, got a foothold here in terms of real estate, I was able to also kind of overcome some of those things in ways that I think a lot of county residents, past and present, are not able to. And I want to name that privilege. I was, you know, really activated when I began to spend time in Marin City. It was a place that taught me how to love myself and care about myself and um, make me feel okay in my own skin. And there's a beautiful cultural legacy as well that really we need to lift up and learn from. And I think some folks in the chat have been calling for that. And I just want to add my voice to that chorus. But I began to notice really clearly. I mean, I played Babe Ruth baseball. I played Pop Warner football. I played CYO basketball. I grew up with a lot of Black people from Marin City, and but I didn't go to school with Black people from Marin City until I was a freshman at Tam High, and so I didn't fully understand what the differences meant in our educational background, probably until I was a freshman. And then I started to notice, hey, a lot of my friends are not academically prepared in the same way to go to Tam High that I was going to Mill Valley Middle School. And it started to bother me. It started to bother me that some of my friends couldn't read. It started to bother me that you know, folks were dealing with different things. And we haven't talked about it here much, but there is a legacy of mass incarceration and the impact of the crack epidemic on our community here in Marin that also has a long lasting legacy here on all of these data and statistics that you see here. One of the more emotional points for me in this presentation was seeing that Black people are still 60 times more likely to be incarcerated in the county than anyone else. And that's something we really have to take a look at. Once you've been incarcerated, every other barrier to opportunity that's been listed in this report is elevated by 10 times or 100 times. I remember a time, and I was gently reminded by one of the guys I grew up with that this is no longer true, and that's also important to the narrative. We also, I think, need to name progress. But there was a time when a roughly half of the adult male, a Black male population in Marin City was incarcerated, and that's another real legacy that we have. And the community is still working to recover from that. And I'm sorry, I'm at a school. There's an overhead announcement. I'm going to pause for just a second. But out of a group of about 20 guys that I was very close with in high school, I was the only one that was able to go directly to a four-year university. And there's still only a handful of us that actually have college degrees. And so while Tam and Redwood at that time were the two top performing high schools in the state, Black and brown kids, English language learner kids, low-income kids were not being served. I'm really interested to unpack the green education data piece and really see why that's green and how it's green. I know that in our little tiny school district, we had started to do better with Black students, but we're still very far off of where we need to be for Black and brown kids and for English language learner kids and for kids in special ed to be anywhere measurable or comparable on par with white and Asian students in our county. And so we've done a lot of things to try to desegregate this school district, some of which are really named in this report, but I want to focus on actions. One of the first things I noticed is that we almost had no BIPOC teachers when I became the superintendent here. We had one when I started. We now have 14 BIPOC teachers in basically a little over a 2-year period. Those are some of the actions that we're trying to take to make sure that this cycle is broken, that this legacy doesn't continue. We know from a lot of academic research that having just one Black teacher or a BIPOC teacher can positively impact students of color and white students, both academically, socially, and emotionally. And so, I think this is an area that I'm very happy to partner with Marin Promise and some of the other school districts in the county. They allowed us to pilot a teacher of color pipeline, or what we call CREED, Culturally Responsive Educator Equity Development pipeline for the county. And we're seeing the fruits of that right now. And hopefully we'll start to see that throughout the rest of our county in terms of the number of teachers of color that we're able to attract to work here. Over 50% of the students in Marin County Public Schools are students of color, but less than, I believe, 85% of teachers are, or about 85% of teachers in Marin are white teachers. And so that's an action that we've taken here locally in the Sausalito Marin City School District that I want to encourage everybody that's on this call to start to advocate for in your local school districts. Some of the other things that we've done are through the amazing work of our community school director, John Muir Reynolds, and the development of the Marin County Cooperations team. We've been able to really be responsive to a lot of the things that were named in the report about impacts on low-income communities of color from the pandemic. Our partnership with Felicia and Performing Stars, whether it's masks or bus chaperones or other things, is also really helping us to try to directly take an action and mitigate and actually come up with positive outcomes in a lot of these areas. But the area of housing is critical. And supporting the Golden Gate Village Residents Council is critical. As early as the year 2000, I think the Marin City population was still 96% Black. I think the most recent census data has Marin City at about 30% Black. So you can see just in 20 years, the gentrification has been incredibly rapid. And the need for low to middle income housing is incredible in our county, whether it's to keep BIPOC people in the county or attract BIPOC people to the county. But it's also critical in retaining teachers of color. Many teachers cannot afford to live in our county. And so we're also taking some steps to develop some workforce housing and to partner with a couple organizations to do that. Most namely, recently, we have a partnership with Catalyst Housing. They bought a complex here up the hill in Marin City, and they're giving below income rents to teachers from the Sausalito Marin City School District and also to other staff. And so I think, we really need to focus on the actions like housing development, like rental assistance, like food assistance, like really improving education for Black and brown kids in our county to actually move the needle even more. I hope the next time this Race Counts report comes out, there is a dramatic shift from second most disparate to, I don't know, maybe fifth or 10th or less. This county has the resources to do it. I saw in this presentation, there was only 5,000 people that don't have health coverage in our county. I'm pretty sure the 50 wealthiest Marin residents could get together and write a check, and those 5,000 people could have health insurance. We know that this is one of the greatest barriers to education. When you're sick or your grandma's sick or your mom is sick, it can't get you to school, or can't get the medication that they need. Guess what? Kids don't go to school. When kids don't go to school, they can't learn. And so I do want to encourage us. This data is incredible. It's critical. We can't surface these issues without data, but I do want to encourage us all, much like Lisa Santora shared, What are the SMART goals? What is the action plan? What are we going to be doing dramatically differently so that we're not only responding to the negative impact of COVID, as Chauncey laid out for us, but that we're also dealing with the structural racism that set up this perfect storm here. Many people question me, well, why did you open school when no one else opened school? Why did you open in-person school? To me and to my team here, that was an equity action. We knew that our kids were already at least a year, if not more, behind many of the other kids in the county. We also knew that many of our students and families struggled to access distant learning in a way that allowed them to stay on grade level or even to try to catch up. And so we made the decision to open, and we were open, the first public school district in Marin County to get open, and had some of the highest number of operational days, I think, of anywhere in the state last year. We had 176 in-person days. But, you know, I was able to do that because we also have a lot of resources. And so if we want to see similar responses throughout our education system, we really need to look at how we're funding education. And Marin is well funded educationally, but there are still school districts in our county that have a much lower per pupil spending than some of the other small school districts like the Sausalito Marin City School District. We're at approximately 236 days of in-person school operation with no COVID transmissions. And that is an action that we took in order to try to make up some of the ground that we know that our students and families have lost for a long time, for generations, for decades. Our partnership with the Marin County and MCF to offer no-cost Wi-Fi to Golden Gate Village residents and residents of the Ridgeway Apartments and students that are in our schools is another action that we've really tried to take to close that digital divide. It's interesting that that wasn't part of this race counts report, but I would encourage Chauncey and Layla maybe to look at that, because that's also still impacting our community in a major way. And so this is just a small offering of some of the actions that we've undertaken. And like I said, it's not perfect. We have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of improvement for us to do in this area of Black and Brown and English language learner achievement, student and family engagement. We've attracted a lot of teachers of color. We now need to make sure that we're creating an environment that retains teachers of color. And so I'm not here to say that, you know, what we're doing is even great or even perfect. I am here to say that we're working very hard to take actions to mitigate these things. And I am excited about the direction in which we're pointed, but we have a lot of work to do so that we can be the highest performing school district for Black and Brown kids in the state of California. And that's really our goal. And I think I'm close to 10 minutes or probably over, and I apologize for being long-winded, but as I said, it's hard not to be emotional and not to feel a little bit of anger as a person of color when we see these kinds of statistics. This is the richest county or the second richest county in the country. And we absolutely, if we work together, can solve a lot of these problems so that that Marin residents can walk their talk and hold their heads high about taking action for social justice and not just paying lip service to social justice. Thank you.